Thank you so much for your patience. Hi, Jessica from Bermuda. How are you? Send Danny my regards as well. I wanted to thank you all for being here and for your patience as we finished getting some things ready on the back end. So we're going to go ahead and get our Tech Talk started today. First, I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping. I'm thrilled to be here today with another Tech Talk from our region, this time from the US Virgin Islands. But before we dive into the presentation, I would like to take a moment to thank everyone who filled out the gap analysis survey. If you guys saw those emails come out to the region and you filled it out, thank you so much. Those results of the survey will help inform our future workshops and training opportunities. So I know that it was a little bit of time consuming, but it very much appreciated. And we look forward to an exciting 2024 year that is just around the corner. So now that we've got that, let's delve into today's talk. Again, welcome. I'm Lena Ramirez. I'm the coordinator for the Caribbean and Central American Botanic Garden Network. I'm based here in Naples, Florida, with the Naples Botanical Garden. And I want to take a moment to thank Dewey Hollister as well. He is the director of VIRPI, which is the Virgin Islands Rare Plant Initiative. But before that, just a little bit of ground rules before we start. So this presentation is both in English and in Spanish. So you will see at the bottom of your Zoom presentation an icon that says interpretation. If you want to watch this in Spanish, please click on that and then click Spanish in the options given. And then be sure to mute the original audio. That way you're listening just to Spanish and not my voice with Spanish overlaid. If you're not speaking, please mute yourself so that we can give our presenter the floor and our full attention. And then at the end of the presentation, we will have time for Q&A, question and answers. And at that point, you can either raise your hand, you can unmute yourself, or you can type your question in the chat, and then I can read it off to our presenter. So with that, today's presentation is being given by Dewey. It is Cultivating Awareness, Safeguarding Rare Plants in the Virgin Islands through the Virgin Island Rare Plant Initiative. So first, a little bit about Dewey. So Dewey is a University of Cincinnati graduate. He boasts a rich career spanning over 30 years as a garden and landscape designer. In 2004, he played a role in co-founding the Ohio Heritage Garden, a botanical gem at the Ohio Governor's Residence, and continues to contribute to its ongoing success. In 2015, Dewey served as executive director of the Botanical Garden of the Virgin Islands on St. Croix. And this was until 2021 when he took over the role of director for the Virgin Islands Rare Plant Initiative at the Naples Botanical Garden, adding another chapter to his impactful botanical journey. And now today we'll get to learn from him. So today's presentation, Cultivating Awareness, is an initiative aimed at enhancing the value of overlooked and scarcely known plants through cultivation and awareness. First, VIRPI is crucial as it preserves and protects rare Virgin Island plants, addresses study challenges, and contributes to broader diversity conservation. Plus, my favorite part, it aligns with our Caribbean strategy for plant conservation. I asked Dewey to look through and tell me which target it aligned with, and he sent me a laundry list, almost all 20 targets his project touches on, but most specifically within Objective 2, which is conserving plant diversity and using it sustainably. So now with that, I would love to open up the floor to Dewey to share his work in the Virgin Islands.
Thank you very much, Lena. I appreciate it.
Dewey, could you unmute for us?
Oh, am I muted? My goodness. I don't know why I would be. I'm showing as unmuted. Huh.
Nope, sorry, we can't hear you.
Well.
Never mind. They can hear you. I can't hear you.
Oh, okay. So everyone can hear me.
Yeah, now I got you.
Oh, you got me too. Okay, good. That sounds great. Well, anyway, I just wanted to say thank you for the lovely introduction, and thank you all for being here today and taking this time out of your day. And welcome to the Virgin Islands. So I am anxious to share with you a little more than just our view of the island. There you can see a rainbow over my island of St. Croix. But I want to pay particular attention to the title here, Cultivating Awareness and Safeguarding Rare Plants. I think first and foremost, I want to say that we can't save anything unless people are aware of it and care about it. A plant that is not seen and known, no one cares anything about. So we have to make sure that they get seen and that they are known about. On the other hand, we have to make sure that there are enough of them to survive. And we concentrate very heavily on making sure we have genetic diversity as we work with each of these plants. So I'm going to give this talk really from the perspective of several different plants that we work with. And we'll talk about some of these other elements as we move along through the talk. Go ahead. And again, you can see our logo here. And we have, of course, we are associated and we are a program of the Naples Botanical Garden, which we are exceedingly happy with. And it's wonderful to work with such great people in the Naples Botanical Garden. And we're also very glad to be with the network of the Caribbean and Central American Botanical Gardens. And I have to say, you cannot see it. I was so clever to wear the t-shirt. I'm going to pull it up here. I do have my official network t-shirt on from the Bahamas, which is a fabulous shirt. And sorry if everybody didn't get one, but it's absolutely great. But anyway, let's go ahead and move along. I apologize for using VIRPI and the Virgin Islands Rare Plant Initiative simultaneously. They mean the same thing. And I thought I would first to show you where we are. So here is a map of the Virgin Islands. The Virgin Islands, as you can see here, are divided between the Spanish Virgin Islands, the US Virgin Islands, and the British Virgin Islands, which the reality of that is that the international border lies between the US Virgin Islands and the British Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico and the Spanish Virgin Islands being part of the US as well. So when you look at this map, I also want you to see that our island of St. Croix that we're headquartered on is quite a distance away from the other islands. And you might ask why we are headquartered on St. Croix. The answer is a historic one. This island is very large and has a lot of flatter land, which is good for growing things and good for nurseries. The other islands are very steep and it's hard to find enough land to do something on. So St. Croix is now, as it was in the past, the best place to be growing large quantities of things. I want to call your attention to the position of St. John, right there in the middle of the Upper Virgin Islands. We're going to return to that several times. Go ahead. And I think this will help you understand why plants and plant communities have evolved the way they have in our area of the Caribbean. You can see that the Northern Virgin Islands are really just an extension of Puerto Rico geologically. And they, during low ocean times, are actually physically connected to a larger Puerto Rico. So they are part of the Greater Antilles. St. Croix is an oceanic island. You can see it's on an isolated mountain out in the middle of the ocean, and we have never been connected to any other island. So that makes a big difference in our plant communities. The rising and falling of the ocean has allowed plants to exchange in the Northern Virgin Islands and then become isolated for long periods of time. In St. Croix, things have to arrive on St. Croix as they do with an oceanic island, never by way of land. So we don't share the same plants in many cases. In some cases we do, in many cases we don't. So I just wanted to let everyone see how that works. Go ahead. Now, obviously, the Virgin Islands Rare Plant Initiative, we are very concerned with making sure that plants that need to be reproduced and propagated are. And this is one of the species we work with. This is Bastardopsis agaricii. First thing I'd like to say is you're going to hear eggers a lot. He was a botanist that worked extensively in this area. Many of our plants are named for him, and it's not a typo that you keep seeing that on the various species names. This is Bastardopsis agaricii. Used to be Sida agaricii, which was maybe nicer to say. But at any rate, I want to call particularly your attention to the plant on the left. And I'm going to linger on this slide a bit because there's a lot to unpack here. The plant on the left is located in a private garden owned by Eleanor Gibney, who is one of the most fabulous native plant knowledgeable people in the Virgin Islands. And this plant obviously has been cultivation in her garden. It originated as a cutting from a plant on Great Thatch Island in the British Virgin Islands. As far as I know, those plants may even be gone. So this may represent the last of Great Thatch's genetics for this species. And that started me thinking, I mean, how many other botanical gardens perhaps have this in their collection? And I had my colleagues at Naples take a quick search. We discovered that there is one at the Missouri Botanical Garden. There were two at the Fairchild Botanical Garden in South Florida. And then there's this one in this private garden on St. John. Well, you would think that that represents 4 possible plants to prevent extinction of the species. Turns out the one in Missouri was a cutting of one of the ones at Fairchild. So it's not different. And then it turns out when we looked at the records that the two at Fairchild, one said it came from Great Thatch, and the other said it came from Eleanor Gibney's garden in St. John. And I've been to Eleanor's many times, and on almost many of the occasions, she said, "Oh, would you like a cutting again or another cutting?" And I can tell you that all the plants that we were working with really were one genetic individual, this one. So this species wasn't protected at all. And so that takes us back to the wild. So there you see on the second slide, you need to go back in the wild and find how much genetic material you have of the species. And it's not a lot. Originally, this species was discovered on Joost van Dyke Island in the British Virgin Islands, but its core population is on the island of St. John. This tree pictured is one in the wild on St. John in one of its populations. The third slide is one of our VIRPI volunteers, Susie Sheehan. She's holding a cutting grown plant next to seedlings. As far as I know, we and now Naples Botanical Garden are the only people to have grown this from seed in any significant way. It's interesting when you look at the seedlings compared to the mature foliage, it's almost hard to tell that it's the same species. This is a bit of a problem when you're trying to find things in the wild to be able to recognize them for the species that you're after. But at least with the seedlings we have, we know where they came from, which populations, and so we have some genetic diversity there. And then the far right-hand slide is a sign of success. This is the first flowering of this species in our cultivated plants. So let's go ahead to the next slide. And here's another species that we work with, and this is Erythrina agaricii. I promised you more from eggers. There you are. And this plant, whose core population is also located on St. John. And if you can see a theme here, it's why I wanted you to locate the island of St. John on the map. The reason that so many of these plants have their core populations, their biggest numbers, on St. John is because it is a largely protected island. There's a very large U.S. national park that encompasses the majority of the island, and there are other protected areas. In fact, we in VIRPI actually serve on a committee with a private land trust who has other land on St. John. So there's a lot of protection going on there. And that's why so many of these plants are there. It's not because they may not have occurred on other islands, but they've been eliminated from those other islands, or their populations are much smaller there. You may notice that this flower looks similar to our logo. That is because we based our logo on this plant. So that explains why it looks similar to you. I just want to go ahead and say we do monitor the species that we're going to be talking about or have talked about, because you have to know what you've got in the wild. I mentioned this before, you need to know how many, but you also need to study the plants and see how they behave in the wild. We knew that Bastardopsis, which we just saw, has to have at least 2 genetic individuals to reproduce. This one does not. This one is self-fertile. So let's go to a little field trip we had in the wild in the video right next door here. And you can see, whoops, there we go. You can see as we are looking at this woodland setting, what we're looking at is the fact that the branches of this tree sometimes actually loop down to the ground and run along the ground. And as they run along the ground, they create new trees. And you can see clusters of those trees along the way. You're going to catch a glimpse of Claire Weaver, who is our eyes and ears on St. John monitoring. And she discovered this behavior. And the reason that's important is because we made the assumption that if we collected seed or propagating material from each individual in each of its populations, that we would have genetic diversity. But the truth of the matter is, each of these populations may perhaps just be a clone, one big clone. So this discovery that VIRPI made here that Claire brought to our attention is very serious as far as how much genetic diversity there is. So more studying has to be done. But you do have to pay attention in the wild. Go ahead. And here's a few more of this species. You can see the seeds germinating on the left, young seedlings in the middle, and myself standing at one of our grow sites with some of the larger specimens. And these are what I refer to as the educational sites. These we plant out where we want to have signage or do educational work with them so that people really get an idea of what the plant looks like. Obviously, if you were doing reforestation, you'd rather have very small tree pots and tree growing tubes in order to plant more plants quicker. But when we're going to do something with schools or parks or whatever it is, we like to have this larger size. Go ahead. And in fact, that's what you're seeing here. And our little title here is planting a living gene bank. What we are working towards is being able to plant many living gene banks as ex situ plantings so that we have a reasonable expectation of being able to back up the wild plants in cultivation. So here you can see we have a collaboration ongoing with the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy owns about 600 to 700 acres on St. Croix and on St. Thomas. And as I mentioned before, we work with the St. John Land Conservancy on St. John. So we have lots of places we can plant plants and we can do interpretations. And here you can see at the main campus of the Nature Conservancy, this particular species being planted as a living gene bank. And we have enough diversity, we believe at this point, to actually claim this as a living gene bank. And you can see them being unloaded from a truck and also being planted. Go ahead. And now we're going to look at another species we work with. And I suspect quite a few of you may already be familiar with Solanum conocarpum. Solanum conocarpum, I would say, is the symbolic plant for rare and endangered species in the Virgin Islands in our region. And it's probably been popularized more than any. Many botanical gardens have this plant in their collection. But like so many cases, this plant has limited genetic diversity in cultivation. So we are, of course, making sure that that gets corrected. On the bottom piece of this slide, you can see me on St. John, again, St. John, with a wild plant in flower. And the two top pictures show VIRPI's plants that we've been growing on from very diverse sources that have now gotten large enough to flower and are making fruit. It's actually quite an attractive plant. And I think some of the future for many of our rare plants is to get them into general cultivation once we have enough numbers and genetic diversity. But anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the next. Now, I should mention that Solanum conicarpum does have to cross-pollinate in order to have seed. So we are, again, quite sure that when we get seed, we have had cross-pollination, unlike the species before where we're not sure since it's self-fertile. But here you can see the actual Solanum conicarpum that we've been growing, going again, being planted as a gene bank. I think in this case, we're talking about 46 individuals that are being planted from several different populations on St. John, so a reasonable amount of genetic diversity. And you'll notice the tag in the gentleman's mouth, that is our genetic tag. It marks each individual as to what parent plant it was propagated from what population. And of course, we map this as well so that in case the tags go missing, we know which plant is which. Go ahead.
Dewey, could you slow down just a little bit to give our
Certainly.
interpreter some time?
Certainly.
Thank you.
So you may wonder, with the island map we saw before, how we get plants from one place to another. And of course, it has to be by seed. Here on the left, you can see plants that we've produced being readied for shipping to go from St. Croix to St. Thomas. In the middle slide, you can see a picture of the Queen Elizabeth IV ferry, which goes between St. Croix and St. Thomas. And on the right-hand side, you can see the same plants having arrived on St. Thomas at a public and tourist facility where they will be interpreted as an interpretive planting. I want to mention that the ferry kindly allows us to have free transportation, which is hugely helpful to us. So finished trees can be transported back and forth, propagating material can be transported back and forth, and this makes life a lot easier. So much thanks to the ferry. Go ahead. And here, I just want to talk about one of my favorites. This is an absolutely exquisitely beautiful and very rare native plant. This is Eugenia ehrhartii, and it has only been known from the island of St. John until very recently. Our friends from Kew found a small population on Virgin Gorda Island in the British Virgin Islands. So you never know. It's certainly worth looking that you may find other populations as you look to see them. As you can see on the left, the plant produces its flowers and fruits, and those are the flower buds you're looking at, on the trunk of the little tree. And you can see me on the bottom hanging off the side of a hillside in one of the native habitats of this plant in St. John. And the people you see in the upper right, Chuck McQuaid on the left, his foundation supports the Virgin Islands Rare Plant Initiative. Claire Weaver behind me monitors all these species. Of course, I'm in the middle, and wonderful Eleanor Gibney is there on the right, who is the absolute source for any knowledge about native plants in the Northern Virgin Islands. And in the middle, up above there, you'll see a plant that VIRPI has produced, and we are now growing this species in fair quantity from many different genetic sources. Go ahead. And I mentioned before that collaboration is key. And here you can see where VIRPI is collaborating with folks from Kew and the British Virgin Islands. The plants, of course, do not know there is a political border between the islands, and so populations occur on both sides of the border. And obviously, if Kew and the British Virgin Islands want to do something in the US Virgin Islands, the VIRPI helps them here. And when they're doing something in the British Virgin Islands, we try to help them there. On this particular occasion, we were there to see their recent discovery of Eugenia ehrhartii and to give them some pointers about how it was similar or not similar to the habitat that we know on St. John. And it's a wonderful collaboration, and it continues now. In fact, Claire is on her way back to the U.S. Virgin Islands, having just been with them over the last few days on another collaboration. Go ahead. Now, this brings up an interesting point. What do you do if you run across a cultivated plant that you know is very rare in the wild? And this is a case and point. This is Getsia elegans, the matabui tree from Puerto Rico, and you can see the flowers of it. This is another plant that is self-fertile, which is helpful. And we found this in the collection of a plant collector on St. Croix. And the worry is that in many cases, people that have collected plants years ago may actually have a plant that genetically is no longer in the wild and may not be in a botanical garden or some other more official place for it to be monitored. So when we came across this plant, we decided to reproduce it and to grow it on. And you can see the seed having germinated there, and you can see on the right-hand side, we have planted 2 on the grounds of the Nature Conservancy. We hope over time we may receive genetically different plant material from Puerto Rico, and we can go ahead and add plants to this and make it an actual gene bank. For the time being, we know we at least have this genetic individual safe in case it's no longer represented in the wild. Go ahead. And this is another case in point of what we just talked about. Here I am in one of our grow sites, and I am here with Calophyllum antillanum, sorry. And Calophyllum is a plant that is not known outside of cultivation in the Northern Virgin Islands. It is known in Puerto Rico and here on St. Croix. But on St. Croix, the plant has become exceedingly rare. Now, here's the case of a species that occurs throughout the Caribbean in many, many islands, and even on the mainland. And it's not particularly threatened or endangered or really of that much concern as a species. However, as I said, on St. Croix, our genetics have almost disappeared, and the plant has almost been exterminated from this island. So we decided that we should save all the genetics we can find on St. Croix so that St. Croix's genetics would be preserved. So this is a different kind of genetic preservation where we're preserving something because it's become rare on one island. And here you can see the plant planted out along with several others on a protected piece of land. And again, we hope to find more individuals in the wild, propagate from them, and plant them together, because one of our problems is that when plants become very rare and scattered, they can't always reproduce well. And by planting them together again, we can get a lot more genetic reproduction happening. So that's what you're seeing with this species. Go ahead. Now, this is another plant that VIRPI is in the process of growing. Once again, this particular species, its main population, its core population is near Bordeaux Mountain on St. John. Again, I told you we'd be talking St. John. And supposedly it has been exterminated from its other population on St. Thomas, but Eleanor Gibney, who I definitely believe, says there is still a small remnant. So we are going to be exploring to see if we can find that and get more material. Meanwhile, the plants that we are growing here on St. Croix and on St. John are from the core population on St. John and represent a reasonable amount of genetic diversity. So in this case, our VIRPI plants are now large enough to begin flowering, but not quite large enough to be planted out, but hopefully soon. Go ahead. And here's another plant that we ran into with a plant collector. This is Pitcairnia jurecii, a very rare member of the bromeliad family, native to Guana Island, a small island in the British Virgin Islands. And again, we don't know if this individual is represented in collections or if its genetics are gone from the wild and gone from any botanical collections. So we've gone ahead and reproduced it. And here you can see it growing in our collection. It was made very rare on its home island because of goats. And I'm sure many of you will have had the same experiences where goats have eliminated species. I think the only reason it survived is because its little offsets are very black and tiny, as you can see in the middle photo, and the goats may not have been able to find out that they could eat it. So hopefully we can combine this with other genetics and make a better, more secure gene bank for this plant. But right now, this particular individual, we are saving its genetics here in St. Croix. Go ahead. Now this is really the opposite end. This is Picarnia angustifolia. It's a fairly common member of the bromeliad family, and unlike the one we just saw, occurs on many, many of the islands. And on this case, we are here having acquired a plant again from a collector that is a little different than the typical Picarnia angustifolia. And we are dividing it, as you see at one of our grow sites, into different plants so that we can grow it on better. It had gotten pot bound with the collector. This plant is very smooth compared to the spiny edges of the typical form. So in this case, we want to save this genetic individual. It may be useful for research. It may represent a very far end of the genetic variation in this species. So we think it's important to keep this. It was only discovered one time on St. Croix, so we'll make sure this genetic type is protected. Go ahead. There are a couple of plants I'm going to show you that we are getting ready to start looking at and start growing and studying. This is Catesbia melanocarpa, which is a very rare plant. Its biggest population is here on St. Croix, so far as I know, but it occurs on a few other islands. And I want to also go to the next slide so you can see the next one. And this is Buxus vallei, Voll's boxwood. And here, both cases, you're seeing plants that were cultivated and are now being planted back out into the wild. On St. Croix, Voll's boxwood occurs in only 2 populations. And then I think numerically, our island has almost the biggest, if not the biggest, numbers. And here you can see a group of us in Sandy Point replanting this species to augment and add to the plants that are already there. I want to call to your attention some of my friends here. On the left is Rudy O'Reilly, who, like Eleanor Gibney, he is the expert on native plants on St. Croix. My 2 friends in the middle here are from the Chicago Botanical Garden. And on the far right is Mike Morgan, and he has really been responsible for really monitoring these 2 species and also of helping propagate them. So we are going to be helping him carry on this work. And he has now taken a new job with the USDA and won't have time. So we feel that that's a good opportunity for VIRPI to step in and help where somebody else isn't going to have the time to keep pursuing these 2 rare species. Go ahead. And this is our endemic agave. So this agave is native only to the island of St. Croix. And these are actually little videos. So if you see something moving, you're not imagining it. And you can see the same plants in flower in the middle and producing clones, agave bulbils up and down the stems on the right. This species has never been known to produce seed, and we're worried that the entire population on St. Croix may just be one clone. And again, as we discussed before, when plants get to be very scattered and rare, they oftentimes don't flower at the same time. And you may say, well, look at this. You've got 3 of them blooming at the same time. But that's not really true. These 3 plants all came from the same mother plant when they were planted. So they are clones of a clone. And what you see on the right hand are more clones of the same. So we are getting ready to test the genetics of this species. and see if there is any genetic variation and try to bring those plants together. And it's rather a mystery as to how this plant got all over the island and yet never produces seed. We're going to try to do our best to see if seed can be produced. Go ahead. And now you can see him moving there. And this is a planting that when I was the director of the St. George Village Botanical Garden, or as I renamed it when I was there, the Botanical Garden of the Virgin Islands. I think you can see where I went with there. We put this planting in. This is the very first display planting for the Virgin Islands Rare Plant Initiative. And it displays many of our rare plants from several islands, as well as some not so rare native plants, so that people can see both rare and not rare, and planted in a very natural way. We wanted people to be able to experience a wilder look of the plants, but yet be able to experience that in a comfortable, accessible way. Because again, if the public can't see something, they're not going to value it. So we want to make it as educational and as easy to access as we possibly can. Go ahead. And I love the idea of this island as our classroom. We are working with quite a few of our local schools to develop curriculum and to work with our native plants. And I think the thing to think about is a plant can be a pathway to any kind of knowledge. It can be conservation, yes, nature, yes, but it can also be a pathway to poetry and art and history. Many of our plants have local uses in local medicine and other things. So there's many topics that you can expose children to and teach them through plants. So we take classes on field trips, we work at the schools, we develop in-classroom curriculum, and we try to in any way get the next generation ready to take over from us to protect these most valuable assets that anywhere has. And thank you very much for joining me. I hope I didn't take too much time. I do tend to go on, and I could go on for a long period of time. So I also want to thank Lena so much for helping with this and helping move our slides along and trying to make everything work well. Hope to see you all in person at some time soon, and have a good day here from the Virgin Islands.
Thank you so much, Dewey. With that, that begins our time for Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask Dewey.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Jessica from Bermuda. How are you, Dewey and Lena?
Hey, Jessica, how are you?
Good, thanks. Excuse any noise. I am driving, but I've been very attentively listening, and I just had a quick question regarding your recording processes, Dewey, for when you're out in the field collecting, trying to find separate not all the same tree from the same mother, basically. Like how do you
Right.
record all that? What apps you use, etc.
Okay, so it's a really good question. Up to this point, we've been doing it in a relatively old-fashioned way. We have tags on all of the plants that give their identity. We map them in the good old-fashioned way. So we have hard maps. But we are also starting to move towards an app like Survey 123 because you need to get it into the electronic world. And in some cases, we're picking up where others have left off. We've had various people, and I can think of one person I'd like to mention, which is Gary Ray. He did an awful lot of work in the U.S. Virgin Islands, particularly on St. John. And so many of these plants have actually been labeled since he labeled them. So we carried on with the old-fashioned way of doing it, but the Survey 123 and the GPS technology available to me, is the way of the future. We are moving towards that so that everything can then be easily mapped and accessible to everyone. So we're in process. So to answer your question, we are moving from the old-fashioned way to the more updated way. And a great help is definitely the Naples Botanical Garden. They have really been leading the way and helping a lot of us, I think, in the Caribbean adopt many of these electronic standards.
I have a question. I would like to participate, but I don't know if I should ask permission first. Can I go ahead? Good
Go ahead.
afternoon.
I can
This
hear
is
you.
Rossana Vaccarino. It was very interesting to talk to you. I've been living in St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands for almost 25 years. And
Oh, wow.
I had a little nursery, and I know very well Gary Ray and Eleanor Gibney. I've been doing hikes in St. John to collect native species. And I will hook up with you because I propagated the Solanum. I propagated actually here in Puerto Rico, the Goetia elegans with great success for populations. And I think I also propagated the Agave Garciana. When I first came to St. Thomas, after Marilyn, we rebuilt Coral Wald, and there was a weevil that was destroying all the population of the agave in the island. I don't know if you remember. And I hooked up with an entomologist. We tried to do treatment, and I propagated some. And I think I know where we can spot a couple, but I don't know if they are from seed. As you know, they do little bulbils. So it's probably that I cannot tell you. But I was going to wonder, in one of my hike to St. John, I discovered a tree that I love so much, and I don't know if it is endangered, but I tried to buy it in Florida, and it's a completely different population, of course. It's called Myrchantes fragrans. When you walk in a hike in St. John, in a particular one of those coastal woodland, it has a very orangey trunk, and it's very, very beautiful. And when I was in St. Thomas, I found one or two trees that were planted in the University Virgin Island in St. Thomas, and I propagated from seed, and I planted in my gardens because I'm a landscape architect. And I wondered, that is one that you should spot and propagate, because for your idea of making people sensitive to native species, that is absolutely one that would be appreciated because it's so beautiful in terms of structure, trunk, flowers, and everything. It just occurred to me that was one of the, I don't know if it is endangered or rare, but I cannot find it anywhere. And anyway, now I live in Puerto Rico and I work here, but I know a lot more about the species in the Virgin Islands than the one in Puerto Rico. And my nursery was destroyed by the Hurricane Irma. And so most of the propagation, I planted them, but now I don't do that anymore. So I will try to connect with you to share experiences if you wish for growing or things that I might know.
Oh, please.
Anyway.
Yes, please reach out to me. I would love to be in touch, and particularly we could combine forces there. There might be a way that we could help with, say, the Getsia and those kinds of things.
Yes.
And as far as the plant you're talking about, I love that plant. It is
Plant, right?
It's everything you say. The beautiful structure, beautiful bark. And I did put on my design hat when I look at some plants like that. I think the public would absolutely love it. It is not commonly grown in nurseries in Florida. In fact, I don't know of it being grown there at all.
No, it is grown, but it's completely different. I order it from there, and it's not as beautiful as ours. So that's why we should be very careful not to import that from Florida and try to propagate our own species, which is different.
And you are so correct in saying that, because the genetics from the Northern Caribbean, Cuba, and Florida, and the Bahamas, are so different than the genetics we have here that I wouldn't want the two genetics mixing. And I also wouldn't want the potential bringing a disease or a pest in from Florida on a native plant that then turns out to be targeted now for our native population. So I think we always have to grow. And that is one thing that Virgin Islands Rare Plant Initiative is getting ready to do, is build a very large nursery facility so that we can really ramp up our numbers, so no one will ever be tempted again to go to Florida for native plants. We want to make sure
I love
we
that
have enough.
idea. You have to start a very big nursery. So we also, for landscape architecture project, can be your clients to buy these plants.
Exactly. And you know how it goes. When you get a project or you get a grant, the time is limited and you don't have time to propagate and grow it on. And
right.
so you end up bringing it in from Florida. If we had the plants ready to go here, which we will, then there will always be a local source. And we are, of course, tracking the genetics too. There's the temptation with nurseries to propagate from one tree because it was handy. And that's not the material to let out to the public. You need to have diversity. And I do also want to say that about Naples Botanic Garden, is they're working with cities like Naples to get very well propagated and genetically diverse Caribbean plants out into the landscapes so that people become more familiar, but also it helps protect them.
Right. Well, thank you.
I'll look forward to talking to you.
And yes, please, if you have a question, there's no need to ask for permission. Just go ahead and unmute and ask away.
I'll probably wore them all out.
No, you just gave a really well and thoroughly explained presentation. All right, well, if there are no other questions, let me just check the chat. Okay, no questions in the chat. So with that, if nobody else has any questions, we'll go ahead and end our presentation. Dewey's email is here on the slide if you'd like to get in contact with him. Oh, thank you so much, Jessica. Jessica said thank you in the chat, as well as Jennifer Flood. Thank you, Jennifer, as well. You can all get in contact with Dewey at deweyhollister@gmail.com. The email was also in the flyer that was shared out if you need to reference that back as well. So thank you all for your time. Thank you, Dewey, for yours as well and for a great presentation. And we hope to see you soon.